So I just started the recording for everyone that's watching. Our basic template for every class will be that we will do some skill. I'll show some skills. I might do some demonstrations too along the way, and then we'll practice them together in triads, kind of in breakout groups, and then we'll come back and process a little bit. And the goal will be to go over some of the foundational kinds of skills, especially the fourth class. I am going to spend some time on like treatment planning and case notes and things like that, but we'll do that a little bit later. And so I'm not going to go exactly in order of the book. The book has a little bit a different order than I'm going to go in, but I just wanted to do some of these basic skills at the front end of the class versus wait until Christmas. I wanted to kind of go ahead and do it now. Okay, any question about that? All right.
Hello, Dr. Bedard. Can you
Yes,
hear me? Hi,
I
this is
can.
Sarah Kim. I just want to ask you in advance, did you post the revised midterm you said, or am I misunderstanding that? Because I can't seem to find it.
Yeah, you can't find it because I took it off.
Oh, okay.
So the question bank questions that I use, and Joy's the one that sent me the email saying that question from chapter 7 are really from chapter 8. So the question bank that I use skipped chapter 7 altogether. So I took it off and I'm going to re-edit it and I'm going to put it back up tomorrow. So
Okay.
if you've already got it and you're working on the first few chapters, they're fine.
Okay.
But I did take it off, and the midterm is only going to cover through chapter 7, not 9. We're going to do 1 through 7. So I basically split the book up into halves. There's 14 chapters.
So
Thank
it is
you.
1 through 7?
Yeah.
Chapters 1 through 7? Okay.
Yeah. I just decided it would be easier to do it that way, to make it half and half. It makes the questions, it gives you like a 50 question test, each test, instead of one's longer than the other.
Okay.
Okay. I'm going to, at the very end of class, I'm going to save time for questions too, just FYI. I'm kind of hitting the ground running. Sorry. I'm in like therapy mode and like get things done mode. So I'll probably need to pump the brakes a little bit. Is anybody tired this week? Because it's Thursday. Okay. Well, I appreciate everyone being here tonight. So could I get a volunteer guinea pig at the beginning of class right now that would be more than happy to be like, hey, let's do some therapy? Tyler's hand went up first.
I got you, Doc.
I'm going to put him right here in the middle of my screen. Okay. We're going to talk about genuineness, warmth, empathy. We're going to talk a little bit about questions tonight, but things like that, and then kind of like establishing rapport, like what happens at the beginning of sessions. That's kind of what the stuff we're going to talk about tonight. And I've got some slides I'm going to show, but I thought maybe before we start that, and Tyler has agreed on the spot to be a guinea pig, that maybe I would do like I don't know, 5 minutes, maybe 10 with Tyler to demonstrate a couple of those things. Okay. And those are all from Carl Rogers, basically kind of gave us those 3 basic areas: genuineness, warmth, empathy. That's Rogerian therapy. That's like the basis of Rogerian therapy. And if you can kind of lean on those, you got a really good foundation. So I thought maybe I would try some of that today, and that all comes into play when you start building rapport with clients, especially at the beginning, right? So Tyler, since I'm putting you on the spot, I'm also going to want you to actually talk about something that's like actually going on.
Yeah, I got a whole docket lined up for you.
Oh yeah, that's perfect.
People are going to think that we staged this. You asked me to do this beforehand. We're ready.
So I'll watch the time, and then you guys watch me and tell me what you think I'm doing or not doing. Okay. Don't worry about Tyler. He's not important. All right. He's just a client. Right. And then after that, we'll spend a little bit of time talking about it, and then we'll jump into some slides. Okay. So this would be like literally like first session, Tyler and I would have met. probably would have read his intake, that kind of stuff. All right, Tyler, you good with that?
I'm ready.
All right, go for it. Talk to me about what's going on.
Well, so a really recent thing, and by recent I mean as of today, was we just had to take our little boy, and by boy I mean cat, to the hospital, which I didn't think was going to be a big deal, but he started getting sick a couple days ago, and we had to take him to the hospital this morning. I had to drop my wife off at work, take him to the hospital, and it's sad because we love this little guy. He's been a kind of like an emotional support animal over the last few months. It's been kind of tough. But also we had to drop like $1,500 that we don't just have laying around to fix his, I think he had like a urinary tract infection, which to my mind sounds like a really cheap fix, but he's a cat. So they charged through the nose for it. And we're just kind of reeling in the aftermath of that. Like, it's not world ending, but it's definitely a little tough today.
How long has it been going on?
Only a couple days. So the cat thing is a couple days, but there's some more stuff in the past couple months that's kind of contributing to the added stress financially of having to take care of this cat.
That sounds horrible. Like,
Yeah.
really?
I'm really not. I mean, I love this little guy, but there was definitely a thought in the back of my mind. I was like, would it be just cheaper and too cruel to say, like, do we need to take care of him? And then I knew my wife would be upset if I said that, and I don't want to lose this cat. I'm just like, at $1,500 is a lot of money for us right now. So
Yeah. So it sounds like, well, obviously the financial part, but there's big emotions tied to what's going on with your cat for both of you.
yeah, absolutely. He's kind of a special cat for us. He was the first thing that I bought my wife when she moved down from Chicago to so we could get married. He's been with us our whole marriage, and we had like kind of high expectations and hopes that he would be the first pet we had when we had kids one day. And this is the first major health problem that we had. He's just like, it was kind of startling to see this kind of lively, fun cat stop moving all of a sudden. And so we just got a little nervous, a little scared about it.
Little scared. I bet a big scared.
I mean, yeah, it was a big scare. It was a pretty stressful night last night, just kind of staying up and watching him, checking on him every 10 minutes and seeing if he was okay. And like not being able to do anything either. If he's out or if he needs to go to the bathroom, we can do that. But I can't fix him. I couldn't fix this problem for him.
Yeah, that in and of itself is just so helpless too. Anyway, like you can't, like not knowing what to do, but not knowing what to do.
Exactly. Yeah. Like I know there's something wrong and I know something needs to be fixed, and I just don't have the tools or the training to do the fixing.
Oh gosh. Yeah, that sounds like a really that sounds like a fatiguing day.
Yeah, you could definitely say it was fatiguing.
Like heavy, I guess is what I'm.
Yeah, me and my wife would call those heavy boots days. Like you get home and when you kick off your boots, it's like, oh my gosh, I've been wearing stuff all day. But I don't feel like I got a chance to kick off my boots until like noon today when I dropped him off at the hospital, and they said he was probably going to be fine.
Yeah, I guess that was good. That part.
Yeah, it was like take off one set of boots, the cat's okay. Put on the other set of boots. It's going to cost $1,500 to fix him.
Like whammo, here we go.
Yeah. A nice little 1-2 combo.
Is it your only pet?
He is our only pet. Yeah.
What's his name?
His name is Sebastian.
Sebastian.
Yeah, we got him from a rescue clinic.
Oh, so how long have you had him?
Just over 5 years. Yes, I have been married 5 years, so we've had him for like 5.5 years.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. All right, let's stop there. What do you guys see? What do you see? What do you see and what do you hear?
I hear you validating summarizing back to him what he's saying and validating what he's going through.
Right. It's called reflecting content.
You did some sympathization and a little bit empathization, depending on the situation.
Yeah. What's the difference in those two things is what we're going to talk about tonight.
Sympathizing is more like, oh, I'm sorry you feel that way, kind of a thing, and like feeling sorry that they feel sorry. Yeah, feeling sorry that they feel sorry, but not really feeling sorry. And then empathizing is genuinely trying to experience what the other person is experiencing.
Right. Good. Anything else? Wasn't very long. It was like 5 minutes.
You focused on the client and not mentioned anything about, I know how you feel, or I've gone through that. You didn't put the story back personally to yourself, but you kept the focus constantly on the client.
Yeah. So my original thought about doing this tonight was I was going to do everything wrong. But then Tyler started talking about his cat, and I'm like, well, I can't do that to him.
Doc, I'm vulnerable.
Right.
Mhm.
Because there's a certain amount of vulnerability to when people are sharing things, right? So when we work with people, the first thing is depending on the person and depending on the situation, it takes a certain amount of vulnerability, period, and transparency to even meet with us. And sometimes just the fact that they made a phone call or send an email to set up an appointment is a large like leap. Right. So going into a session, always remembering that there's a certain amount of vulnerability anyone's experiencing at any given time just because they're sitting in front of someone talking about something that's going on, whatever it is. Does that make sense? So you have to remember that vulnerability, that if we don't take care of it, then we can't build rapport with people. Because you can't build rapport with people that obviously there's obvious things, right? Like you have to listen, you have to try to understand where they're coming from. If you don't understand, you can ask questions, but those are obvious things. But keeping in mind that, you know, people are coming in quite vulnerable, and especially if they've never done therapy before, you know, you're going to run into plenty of people that I had 3 clients today, new clients that had never done therapy before, ever. They're adults. That's going to happen. And that's a big leap. So thank you, Tyler, for volunteering and talking. Okay. If I would have known you were going to volunteer before, I would have told you what I was going to do, so you wouldn't have been shocked. But then you started talking about your cat, so I decided not to do that.
Sorry to throw a wrench into the plans.
No, you didn't. You didn't. I made a pivot. All right. I'm going to let me get my, people still coming in here. There's one of the hard parts of teaching is when you have certain things you want to cover and you know you're not going to have enough time to cover all of them. That becomes a little bit daunting. So I'm going to pull up something here. And I'm going to go super slow tonight, so these slides won't be like flashing through. We're going to talk about them. And I'm not going to like roll through everything really fast, but I am going to share my screen here really fast. Good. When we think about meeting with people, like I was saying before, we're going to this knowing that there's going to be a certain amount of vulnerability, and those are like the soft skills things that we can think about. But there's a certain amount of thought and structure you can actually put into sessions if you kind of think through a couple of things. So these are going to be just like a few things to kind of think about and think through as you start thinking about seeing clients. So like things to do before a session, kind of walking your way through therapy, walking your way through a session. All of these things are just, some of them are practical things, some of them are just kind of basic skill things, but we're going to talk about all of those types of things tonight. So I think it's really good. Now, this will be part of how therapists should think about therapy. I think it's okay, and I think it's necessary that before sessions, especially if it's a client you've kind of been working with, sometimes you're going to run into places where you're not sure what to do or not sure a direction. And then if you have a new client, you're not sure what they're going to say. And sometimes it's anxiety provoking. I don't know about any of you that have anxiety over things you're not sure about, or you don't know for sure about, or you're not sure what's going to happen. If that's anxiety provoking for you, I think sometimes kind of sitting in that for a little bit and realizing that, hey, maybe I'm a little scared about something, or I don't know, I'm not sure what's going to happen. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's better to make yourself aware of it and acknowledge it than not. Because if you don't, sometimes those nerves come out in weird ways in sessions. And I could give you a lot of examples, but I want to kind of keep going. It's okay to feel whatever anxiety or fears or, whatever you're thinking. It's okay. Right. And the reason why I'm saying this is because, especially when you first start out and you're sitting in front of people, it can be overwhelming at times. It gets easier for sure. It gets better and it gets easier, but there's a certain amount of like overwhelming feeling. So kind of thinking through like, hey, what am I trying to do here? Like, what's my objective? Especially when we have the first 1 or 2 sessions, 3 sessions, like what things are we trying to do? What things are we trying to establish? What things do we want to know? What questions do we want to ask? You can kind of come up with your own kind of bank of questions based on the client. Like if you want to, like say some of you might work with teenagers, right? There might be a bank of questions you kind of think, hey, I kind of want to know these things about them. Or if you work with couples, same thing. Work with adults, same thing. If you work with certain mood disorders, you might want to know certain things. If you do specialization with kids, there might be things you want to know. Some of those things you might ask on the intake form. Some things you might ask like face to face or virtually. Sometimes you might give people questionnaires or checklists to go through. So what kinds of things do you want to know about them? And obviously there's some basic things that you're going to want to work through. Like at the beginning, you're going to want to know like, okay, here's what confidentiality is, and here's what it's not. And here's what that means for me. And here's what that means for my client. When they sign things, kind of going over that with them really briefly and letting them know that this is what confidentiality means. Here's what it looks like. Here's when confidentiality can be broken, and here's when it can't, kinds of things. Some of that depends on their age. Obviously, if you have minors, it means something different than if you have adults. So those are things to work through. And remembering that 9 times out of 10, the client's more nervous than you are. And that comes out in a couple of ways. One way it comes out is in silence. And one way it comes out as in like really being verbal. And just talking and not answering your questions. You just kind of talk about whatever, which is fine. That's normal. That kind of thing happens. So these are just like some basic things to think about. Gentleness, compassionate, warmth, being kind, going over the plan for the session. One of the things that I do every session is we usually have a plan going into a session, but I most typically, like 100% of the time, will ask clients at the beginning, hey, is there anything that's come up this week, or is there anything you'd like to talk about? Because sometimes things come up that they want to talk about that's fresh on their mind that most of the time has something to do with what you're talking about anyway. So sometimes I do that. But it's okay to have a plan and kind of know where you want to go. That plan, a lot of times, is dependent upon whatever your style as a therapist is. Sometimes it's very structured. Sometimes it's kind of loose. It depends on kind of what you want to do. Like working through these, like introducing yourself, talking about confidentiality, talking about how therapy works, that can also be written. My suggestion actually is that it should be written as well. They should be able to see it and read it first. Then you talk about it with them. I typically don't end any first session without letting people know how I work, what to expect from sessions, what to expect from me. There are times where, like this number 7, inform and set expectations concretely. Expectations are very important. That's one of the reasons why I ask you guys in every class I ever work with what your expectations are for the class, because expectations are important. Everyone has an expectation, even in therapy, right? Sometimes we kind of want to know what those are. I've heard every kind of expectation you can think of. And sometimes they don't have an expectation either. Like, I'm just coming, I need help, something, you know, that's fine too. But sometimes people are very, very specific, which is good. I like to show that my style right off the bat and talk through my style and talk about what to expect. But I also try to give examples if I can about what to expect, or try to help them feel a little at ease, is really what I try to do. Having said that, there are clients that come in that, and you can tell within the first 2 or 3 sessions, that really want a more direct style, like more kind of like more direction, but not like telling them what to do per se, because that's not what we do. But being a little more direct, and maybe asking more direct questions. Maybe they kind of don't. Maybe they just want to jump to something, which that happens too, and that can work. That's why I let people know what my style is, so that they know. Because, and this has happened where my style and what they're expecting or what they're needing doesn't match, and the report isn't really there, and it doesn't work as well, and that's okay. I know lots of really good therapists that I can refer people to that have styles of what they might need, and that's fine. That just happened to me tonight. I had to refer a client to someone else that I think would have worked better, because we just weren't, it just wasn't working, and that person kind of needed something that I didn't really do, so we kind of talked about it. And I've referred tons of people that didn't work really with my style. But I prefer to talk about my style and show it, and kind of be about that early on, personally. And I even on the phone, I do that, even if I meet with people. Like, I even do 30-minute consultations now with free consultations with people, just so they can kind of get a feel for that. That particular thing is very conversational. Okay. All right. So Joy has a question about telling people how my style. So what I will typically do, since I'm an attachment theorist, which I don't say that, hey, I'm an attachment theorist, and this is what that, I don't say that. I say, I really try to help people with their connections, and depending on the client. So if it's a couple, I'll say, hey, I want to help you with how you connect. And I will give examples like, talk about safety and security and connection, and talk about things like, hey, I want you guys to be able to either be connected or reconnected with each other. And I want this to be a safe spot. And this is what that means. And I usually tell them kind of like, connection and safety is very similar to when you were a little kid and you played chase or tag, and someone's chasing you, and then you run, and then you get to base. And once you get to base, you're safe. And then they can tag you a million times. It won't matter. You'll always be safe. If we fast forward into adulthood, I don't know any couple that feels safe chasing their spouse or running from their spouse emotionally. We want your marriage to be safe. I want to teach you how to turn to each other for your marriage and your relationship to be safe, and for that connection to happen. And so that's literally what I try to help people do. And we're going to do it collaboratively. I'll specialize it for you, but that's kind of what we're going to do. And then probably, we'll do examples of that. And then a lot of times I'll say, we're going to work on communication, because every couple in the world says we have trouble communication. So I always just jump to the chase and say, we're going to work on communication first. And that's what it looks like this. If I'm working with like an adult, like I'm doing EAP work right now with some companies where it's virtual, and it's just a person, like an adult, one person. I do it a little bit different. Same kind of style, kind of pretty laid back and collaborative, but kind of go through a spiel of, here's what to expect and here's what we'll do. It's very much more CBT focused, and we talk about how your cognitions and your emotions and your behaviors all work together, and how to help them work the best, and how that can be the most healthy. And if we want to change a thought, or if we need to work on our emotions, and I'll kind of go through that and give some examples of that. And I think over time, the way that I have let people know about my style and what to expect has evolved probably and changed over time. I didn't probably do it the first time I started, but I did it a lot more as I've gotten into it, mainly because as you work with people longer and longer, especially if you kind of find a specialty, you start hearing the same things over and over. So you go ahead and talk about those things they're going to say anyway, and just kind of bring them up. And that typically makes people feel better. Does that make sense? Joy, does that answer your question? Hopefully. Okay. It's a good question. That's a good question. Okay. And I'll be the first one to admit, this particular class, I can talk for 4 hours about this really easily and never stop, but I don't really want to do that. So if you have questions, either put them in the chat or just like jump in, because I'll just keep going.
Hey, Doc, I got a question.
Yeah.
Or in your last slide, it wasn't part of the slide, but you mentioned that sometimes when, clients are often more nervous than we are when they're coming in for their first session, manifest in a couple ways of like, sometimes they talk too much, sometimes they don't talk at all. I feel like it might be kind of easier to deal with someone who talks too much, just kind of redirect them and narrow them down. But what do you do when someone just doesn't want to talk? Like they've come into the office and they're walled up. What are you supposed to do?
Yeah. So, one of my first counseling jobs was mandatory therapy with people that had to come to therapy. So I learned how to talk to people that didn't want to talk early on in my career. And so I got really good at like just shooting the bull with people, like just talking to people about stuff, but eventually forming questions around like them and like finding out about them. Because in my experience with people, if you ask the right questions, people don't mind talking about themselves. Usually.
Yeah.
So if you can find the right set of questions to help people talk about themselves, you can usually get them to open up. Now, having said that, there's definitely people that are just nervous and maybe they don't know what to say, or the confidentiality part scares them, or they're scared if they say the wrong thing. Like some people in their minds think I'm going to say the wrong thing and they're going to think I'm really crazy and they're going to, call the hospital. People think things like that. So part of it is, and we're going to talk about rapport here in a second. Part of it is just helping them feel calm and relax and think it's okay. You're okay. Everything's okay. And sometimes I might even say something like, man, like as we talk and maybe get halfway through, and I might bring up something like, I'm really glad you came in today. It sounds like, you're really struggling with a couple of things, because that's usually true. And that usually makes people feel true. And any way you can find to connect with them, anytime you can use empathy is a connector. It connects people. Sympathy disconnects people. Right. So empathy is automatic connection, automatic. But that means we have to be vulnerable enough to feel what they're feeling, which is why we can get a little advanced here. There's a technique called empathic conjecture, which we're going to talk about later today too, where you're basically listening. And I did it with you, Tyler, twice. I said, that sounds really fatiguing, because that sounded like that. I felt tired, heavy, and you said, yeah, the heavy boots. That's like that image is perfect. You can grab that and use that for a whole session.
Yeah.
Right. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah.
But when I asked that, I'm assuming that felt more connective than less connective.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I feel very connected when you asked that.
So that's another thing. These aren't guarantees that people are just going to like, oh, never mind, I'm going to talk. Sometimes people don't talk. And that's okay. That's okay. The second thing I would say about that is pacing matters. Sometimes we just need to slow down. and not go fast. And just take our time. We don't have to be in a hurry.
Right
Which
on.
is like the exact opposite of what everything in the world tells us. Everything in the world says what? Finish
go.
quick. I need to go quick. I don't have time for this. And there's nothing fast about mental health. Not one thing. It's very slow, which is very frustrating to people. Okay.
Ask a quick
Um,
question about
yeah.
empathy.
Mhm.
Is there are there specific techniques that you can share that we can learn about? I find sometimes even on issues that I think I worked through pretty well, I can still, I'm a sympathetic that's not the right word, a sensitive listener. I can get sad. I can have tears. I call them sympathetic tears, but I guess they're really empathetic tears. And, I know it's not like I'm sobbing or something when I'm talking, but sometimes that can happen. And so I kind of personally think if you shed a tear or two, then, oh, well, maybe that just shows it really touched you, but I don't think you got to cut that emotion off somehow to be professional, right? So what do you do if you start to find yourself? I know you try not to get too much in their story and things like that while you're still listening, but what are other tricks to really show empathy and warmth and listen and not start crying? Or if you think crying's fine, then I'm in a sweet spot.
So old school psychology would say, don't cry, keep your
Mhm.
boundary, keep your distance. I think that's crap.
Okay.
I'm not sure how we do work with human beings and not become empathically connected with them at some level. Now, we're not their friends
Sure.
either. There's nothing wrong. Like, so I have a client that I worked with for 4 years on and off. And the first time I worked with him and his wife, they came to me because they watched their 4-year-old son drown in a river. So how am I supposed to not be emotional at some
Mhm.
level? Now, after we got through the initial pieces and we worked for about a year and we're able to kind of get some stability and then talk, we still were emotional in session at times. Or as I've had clients that when I first started seeing them, like couples that weren't even able to be in the same room together
Mhm.
or talk to each other without, yelling.
Mhm.
And within like 4 or 5 months, they are reconnected and loving with each other and still struggling, but happy. And how's that not emotional? How's that not?
Mhm.
It's two different things. But when when people share things with you, if you have the ability to take their perspective non-judgmentally, which is kind of the hard part, and recognize the emotion that's being communicated, those are the 3 levels of empathy that we're trying to figure out. And once we do that, we can still be in charge of ourselves, but still share the emotion. Because what you're saying is right, Susan. We're still in charge of ourselves for sure.
Right.
But it's okay that we're feeling that emotion. It's not like when Tyler and I were talking, I don't know this for sure. My assumption would be if you were paying attention at all, you had to feel some emotion when he starts talking about what was going on with his cat. And then we started talking about them I had to pay $1,500 at Christmas time.
Mhm.
And that was like, you know what I'm saying? Like, didn't everyone feel something?
Yeah.
Did you feel something? Some emotion?
I felt something.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Like what thing? This is a 5-minute conversation that Tyler and I were having. off sporadic, just a spare of the moment conversation. What things did you feel? I'm just
I mean, I
curious.
felt, man, that sucks. That's hard.
Mhm. What else? Anybody else?
It reminded me of just over a year ago when my daughter was going to take her cats to college, and one of them got congested heart failure, and we didn't know, and he passed. So, I have great empathy for him, and clearly I have Therapy Cat with me right now.
Mhm.
I could definitely relate to what he was talking about.
Mhm. What if you don't have animals, never had animals, maybe don't even like animals or cats? Could you still feel something?
Yes,
think
unless
we-
you're.
Oh, go ahead.
You go ahead. I've already spoken.
I think that I don't have a cat, I have a dog. I mean, not that that matters, but I now have a baby, and I'm sure that that's how Tyler feels about his cat, that it's, very precious to him. And so when my son got sick, a little while back, I was really worried about him. And then when that hospital bill came too, that was a little, frustrating and scary as well, right before Christmas. So I could empathize with him and see how that feels on both parts of worrying about someone you care or something you care about, and then also worrying on the other financial end.
That's it. I mean, all of these things are what we do. To me, the question is not necessarily always like, can I cry in session or not? Because sometimes you won't do that. That's
Right.
okay too. Sometimes you will. I think what's hard is the fact that having that level of empathy is fatiguing for us too. Can be fatiguing, right? So we have to take care of ourselves too. Right?
Well,
Does that make
as-
sense?
I think there's also an element of like empathy, feeling what someone else is feeling. But the reality is that sometimes our clients, maybe even a lot of times, our clients are going to be experiencing things that we may not have experienced word for word. Like you may have never had to send a cat to the hospital, but there's a core emotion there of fatigue, of loss, of frustration, of concern about money. Like they're
Yeah.
like the more you dig down into the root of whatever someone's feeling, like you get to these kind of core concerns and fears. And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like that's where we really relate to people, is that kind of foundational level of you're feeling this and I have felt that same thing in another area. I can
Yeah.
understand to a
Yeah.
certain degree what you're feeling, and then
Yeah,
express it in the conversation.
It's absolutely our job to talk through and work through help people work through their emotions. Therapy is 99% that, 1% maybe some other stuff, but our emotions that's the stuff that really triggers things. Now our thoughts are important too, and our behaviors are important too. But they all work together, right? But to Tyler's point, it's absolutely true that we're going to work with people that are going to bring up experiences or things that we don't know anything about. We've never been through, we can't relate to it, but we can relate to the emotion of it. So we've probably felt that emotion somewhere.
And we have to empathize with the clients, right?
Right.
Okay.
Right. All right. Well, let's talk about, let me see. Let me come back to this end of session slide in a second. So I want to talk about a couple of skills, and let's start doing some therapy, man. Aren't y'all excited? Let's do some therapy. Let me find out where I was looking. Oh, this isn't it. Sorry. Okay, here we go. Sorry, guys. I closed my file on accident.
Will you post that one on Moodle too?
Yeah,
Are you?
I'm going to put them all up. Sorry. There we go. All right, now. Okay. We're going to talk about, so I'm going to go through a couple of things about empathy. And I'm also going to talk about reflecting content. We're going to talk about those two things. Matter of fact, let me talk about the content first. Sorry. Let me do that first. Let me do that first. Way better. Okay. I brought this up earlier, the kind of at the first: genuineness, non-possessive warmth, accurate empathy. So there's general things we'll always do when we're trying to understand something, like reflecting back. Like I think I did that with Tyler probably early. Like I hear you saying, when you say things like I hear you saying, and you reflect that back. So non-possessive warmth is exactly what it sounds like. Non-judgmental acceptance of a client, which there's two parts of this that are important: the non-judgmental and the acceptance. It doesn't say non-judgmental agreement. Okay. It's acceptance. Acceptance and agreement are not even really the same thing. Now, why would I say this? Because our world right now has confused acceptance and agreement all the time. Right? I don't always agree with everything, but that doesn't mean I can't accept someone. Like my clients, I've got tons of clients that talk about things. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's a little weird. I don't know if that's good, but I still accept them, and I'm non-judgmental of them, because it's not our job to judge them anyway. Okay. So we can have that kind of high range of that, where you're warmly accepting their experiences as part of that person, or you can have a low acceptance and low warmth, where you're evaluating their feelings and expressing dislike and or disapproval, and you're being very selective with your warmth. Right? So the high level is really more connective. The low level is kind of like a little more judgmental. I can't believe you do that. That's the wrong thing to do. That's kind of what, as I've worked with teenagers come in expecting that for you to do a low level of acceptance with them, because that's probably what they're getting in their life. When you do a high level of warmth with them, it really kind of throws them off a little bit. That's true for most people if they've not had that experience before. Okay. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay. Oh, Joy, I'm going to get to your question in a second. Sorry, I didn't see it. Genuineness, openness to experience. It's being open to what they're talking about, being real with them and trying to understand where they're coming from. Openness, again, is really about trying to allow them to see that you're here, that you're listening, that you are with them, that you will be there. I had a client today tell me that no one's ever really validated what they were saying. Their family doesn't validate them. And literally, guys, all I was doing was listening, reflecting back, and showing genuineness and warmth. Literally, that's all. I was not like, we weren't talking about like changing anything, nothing. I think I asked like 3 questions and made a couple of comments about them. That's it.
Wow.
This person was like, this is, no one's ever validated me like that. Well, that's because there's a genuineness to it, right? And that's important for us to be able to do. Accurate empathy. So it's that sensitivity to what the feeling, what they're saying, what they're communicating. understanding in attuning your emotion with theirs and understanding where it's coming from. And there is a difference between empathy and sympathy. There is places for each one. And sympathy is not a bad thing. It's not evil. It's not a bad thing to do. Sometimes sympathy is more on the surface level of something before you kind of get into it. Having sympathy for someone or trying to sympathize with them doesn't mean you're feeling with them. It just means you have an understanding. You're just not yet going into a little bit deeper level of where they're at. Right? I don't know if you guys have watched the Brene Brown video that I've put online, but she's got a great way of talking about it. Of this kind of like, oh, I'm sorry, that sucks for you kind of deal. You know, that
I love that video.
yeah, it's great. It's a great video. It's kind of like, oh, sorry, that's really crappy. Like if I would have said to Tyler, and he's talking about his cat that's so important to them, if I would have said, man, oh man, that's really difficult. What else did you do today? Well, that's sympathy. It's not super warm. It's not super helpful, but you know, it's still listening technically, Does that make sense? Empathy is more like, that sounds fatiguing. Oh my gosh, tell me more about that. That sounds like whatever, fill in the blank. Okay. Yeah, that let's stop there with that, because here's where I want to jump to talking through and working on some reflective types of listening. So the first thing, the first round of therapy I want to do is I want to start building blocks of like showing genuineness, showing warmth, and showing empathy. And the first building block of it is reflecting back what you're hearing. It's not necessarily always diving right in. Sometimes it's reflecting back, because sometimes you think you know what they're feeling and you don't. But when you start asking questions and reflecting, and honestly, I think this is a good skill. This is one of the first skills that I learned and what I've taught other people when I've taught other skill building types of things. Reflecting back or reflecting content is usually like the foundational building block of reflecting back emotions as well. Okay. For example, Tyler's talking, it would have been reflecting content would have been, so it sounds like you had to, you did this and then this and then this happened. Is that right? Is that what you're saying? You don't have to repeat every single thing, but kind of repeating back what you heard. It's okay to say what I'm hearing you say is, and repeat it back. It's okay for you to say, let me see if I'm understanding, and repeat it back. And it's okay to check in with them and say, is that right? Is that, and I tend to do it just like I just did, kind of tentatively, cautiously, to make sure. And I do that because I don't want them to feel defensive. Does that make sense?
Are you saying reflect back content and emotion?
I'm just saying for right now, we're going to reflect back content.
Okay.
This first round, that's it. And then the next time we get into our little groups, we're going to reflect back emotion. Now as you're the client, you might be talking about all of them. Right? You know what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So this will be, so we're going to be triads. So we're going to be three in groups of three. There'll be a client, a counselor, and an observer. Okay. I don't care who does what when. Everyone's going to get 5 minutes. We'll rotate. Okay. And you'll kind of serve as your own like processing group too. Your triad will. Because at the end of it, and it usually helps if the observer kind of keeps the time. It says, hey, time's up or whatever. Just go ahead and stop it. I know this sounds weird, but just stop the time. It's okay for the observer to say, here's what I saw. Here's what was good about what you were doing, that kind of thing. It's also good to check in with the client, make sure that they were doing what, it's also good for the counselor to say, well, that felt weird, or that felt fine, or that wasn't a big deal. Like it's okay for everyone to kind of talk about what they saw, what they experienced, and then you flip flop. Okay. Or not flip flop, whatever the term is for 3.
Rotate.
Rotate.
Sounds good. I love it. Rotate. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Break out these groups.
All right. Let's go to groups. I'm hoping. Oh, we have just the right amount. Go. I think that was empathetic or sympathetic of me to cut you guys off, but we had to stop somewhere.
Stopped us right in the good stuff.
Yeah. All right, good.
We did great.
I want you to leave you hanging for more. That's good. Okay. How was that for everybody? I got to see almost everybody. Well, most of the rooms.
It was great. It was really good.
We had a successful time.
All right. Anybody feel weird?
Oh, yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay.
Kind of.
All right. Good.
We had like actual sort of therapy sessions, so it was kind of helpful.
It was actually good and helpful. All right, good. That's good.
We
There was a
talked
lot of
about how,
empathy.
oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's all. There was just a lot of empathy.
Yes. Everyone was so genuine.
Mhm.
That's good.
We were saying after we kind of talked through, like, did the practice, we talked about how it was hard a lot of times to not just to listen, but like to want to give that advice to help. Because like I think naturally, I know for me, naturally, I just want to fix things and like help. And sometimes you have to like take a step back and like you said, just reflect back on the content and not the empathy. And so I think that was really hard. I think just, it's something you just have to practice that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I felt like that was really hard. Yeah.
I didn't know what to
And-
say. Like, I didn't know what to do to help.
No, I also felt like it was not easy to start like, what is the issue with me? What's the problem? What am I gonna talk about? Like think about something that you are struggling with that you need help. So I thought it was not easy to come up with that.
Yeah. I was did everybody, well, was it hard to not give advice or
Yes.
tell people what to do or not do, or
Not really, because you gave us a specific assignment.
okay. Right. Okay.
I think it was hard for me. I was the counselor in this role this time. I think it was hard because I felt like I'm sorry, hold on, let me scroll and find her name. Oh, Doris. I felt like
Yeah.
what she was sharing I felt like right now I didn't want to I felt like it was something that was current in her life and something that was happening soon. And so I know that you told us not to, but I had to. So I did share with her something, but I know we weren't supposed to. But so that was hard, but I felt like she needed some advice.
Okay. Good. I
Yeah.
think it can sometimes be helpful to give you like phrases. Like I've on the PowerPoint, I've got some phrases here, like when we reflect back things. Sometimes it's helpful to have some like stock phrases, I guess you can say. Seems like you're saying, or let me see if I understand, or sounds like you're upset about. You know, those are great ways to start a reflection process. And it can also help to keep a conversation going, right? So for example, it could be that someone comes in and starts talking and they're talking about whatever they start off with. And then the next thing you know, they're talking about 5 things. And it's been 5 minutes. And you haven't reflected once, or you know what I'm saying? Like you haven't, right? So sometimes it's good because sometimes people need to get all of those things out kind of at the beginning and use these phrases and say like, it seems like this is what you're saying, and kind of, you know, paraphrase back to them and make sure this is what they're talking about and make sure that this is what they mean. It's obviously easier, like how we did it tonight on purpose, is to keep things short to give you a chance to kind of practice. So these phrases can really help you to try to kind of track what they're saying, but also say back to them what they're saying and paraphrase it a little bit so that they know that you're listening. And you can't paraphrase back to them unless you are listening. Now, my other question would be, did anybody, one, take notes or want to take notes or write things down? I'm just curious.
I did.
I wanted to. I
I
did a little
wanted
bit.
to.
Yeah.
I wanted to take notes so I wouldn't forget something.
Yeah. Okay. Did anybody actually take notes?
I did.
Okay. Okay. And that's fine. You can. It's not a big deal. You kind of have to learn how to do it without seeming like you're just doing it.
Yeah.
So going back to one of the first conversations we had in terms of expectation, I tell people I take notes at the beginning. I'm like, hey, sometimes I take a note and I say, I'll make a joke of it. Like, otherwise I'll forget and I'll have to ask you over and over, which is actually true because I'll forget, you know. If you see 8 people in a day, you tend to forget things that they say. So you're going to write some things down. And we're going to talk about note taking separately, but in this sense, like writing things down, sometimes when you first start out as a clinician, you do want to write things down because you feel like if you don't, you're going to forget, and then you're going to blow it, and then you won't have a chance. And that's really probably not true, but that's what you think. And so writing it down sometimes is like a safety blanket for you. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with it. But you learn, eventually what you learn is if you do feel like you need to write stuff down, because some people are visual or auditory or tactile. Sometimes you have to write things down. It helps you process, which is fine. You learn to write down certain things and not everything. At first you want to write everything. And then you start writing certain things. Sometimes if you write certain things down, you can go back to it and say, hey, I noticed you said blah, blah, blah. What, you know, earlier you said XYZ. Can you tell me more about that? Tell me more about that is like a great universal phrase to use when you want to know more information.
I have a question.
Yep.
So for like, I know you said like writing down, like, you know, sometimes like maybe if you're an auditory person, I don't know, you might be like, no, I don't have time for this, or you don't, you know, we won't have time for this, but just, you know, maybe recording a session or something, just so that way, like just the voice, so that way you can go back and say, okay, this is what they sounded like, or this is what their voice did when this happened. Would that be something you do, or is that something okay to do?
So there's ethical considerations when you record people. You can do recordings if you get their consent. And you have to be very specific about things like what the recordings are used for or not used for, how long they're kept, how do you store them, do you eventually delete them, who sees them and who doesn't, and mainly their consent. So you can record things, that is possible. It's
I would
not
just think, just for like thinking back, like, okay, the session has ended. Let me think back to myself, reflect on it, and then let's know what would my goals be moving forward to the next session? Just not keeping it long. I know for the consent piece, but just,
Yeah.
I don't know if the notes would be better or.
Yeah. I mean, you absolutely can record people. You just have to think about the ethical considerations.
I have a question about that.
Mhm.
If we are recording, what would be your advice on that one? Because basically I'm thinking like if I'm subpoenaed, I kind of don't think that I would want them to have that.
Well, that's what I'm saying. You have to be forthright in what you keep and not keep,
Okay.
and what's confidential and what's not.
So if we destroy it after we take our notes, then it's good. It's okay.
That's correct.
Okay.
And technically in Texas, the law is whatever's in their file.
All right.
So if you don't have anything in their file, they can't have it.
Okay. Thank you.
I have an unrelated question.
Okay.
So in our session, like Danielle was saying that she was having trouble like not giving advice, but Doris was almost kind of asking for it, which I mean, I'm not saying that's Doris's fault by any means, because I feel like naturally some people come to counseling for like guidance and advice. So like, I feel like right off the bat, it might be kind of hard to give. I mean, you don't really want to give advice super early, but what do you do? Like, how would you change the topic or change the conversation back to them if they are genuinely asking, like, what do you think I should do?
Well, it's probably situational, but you can say things like if someone ever straight up asks, hey, is this okay? Or is this okay for me to do? Or should I do this? If someone asks that, which people do, because sometimes you're right, people want advice. I think it's okay for you to say, depending on how comfortable you are too, it's okay for you to say, I don't know if I feel comfortable giving advice on something so personal, but I think we can talk about it more. Let's see if we can figure it out together, or something like that. Or you could say, this seems like a big deal. How long have you been thinking about this? Or you could say, I mean, if you want to be solution focused, you could even ask if they're asking for advice, if they're asking for an answer about something. You could ask, like, how would you know when you actually got this answered? Like, what would it look like if this was, answered? So it kind of depends on the situation, and it depends on how direct you feel like being too. Does that help at all? Does that make sense? Maybe.
Yes, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Could I also add to that, that a lot of times when people are asking for advice, I think they already have a choice and they just want you to confirm it.
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah.
Can you talk
So
about like different scenarios of what you've been dealing with and how you've handled it, and how could you like different options and work through them together?
Sure. Yeah.
Like I was thinking when the question was asked, I'd be going, if you were me, what would you, if let's switch roles, what would you tell me to do and why?
Sure.
So now I'm out of the seat of having to give the advice, and now I'm getting the person to really think about what it is, and we can discuss the options and what are the pluses and the minuses of all the options. And then that moves it away from it coming from me, and it more moves it towards them. I've had that situation happen a few times.
Sure. Yeah. I think all those work. And there's probably like 10 other ways to do it, I'm
Mhm.
sure. There's multiple ways. I just feel like I got this piece of advice from a psychologist friend of mine back in 95 in a class that I'll never forgot. I've used it all when I was in ministry. I use it now. We don't make personal decisions for people. Because that's not my job.
You give advice.
I don't give advice. I don't make decisions. I might give a suggestion about something.
Options. Oh, suggestions. Oh,
Have you tried this, or have you thought about this?
mhm.
But it's not my job. Now, I'm not saying that's not what people want. And maybe there's a reason why they're having trouble trying to figure it out. What's happening? What's stopping you from figuring this out? Kind of stuff. Probably more important. Does that make sense? Maybe, hopefully.
Yeah.
Okay. This is another example on the PowerPoint, just of like other phrasing. There's stuff in the book too, by the way. There's phrasings in the book. There's like some conversations in the book on different things. This particular way of phrasing is also bringing into it's kind of like reading between the lines a little bit and getting to a little bit below the surface, which you can do with people. But this is when you're reflecting back thought, which is a little different than when you reflect back emotion, a little bit different. I feel like when you say things like sounds like, that I usually lean with the sounds like when I talk about emotions, and when I say it seems like you're saying when they're talking about thoughts, I tend to do that, but that's probably a style thing. I just do that. It probably depends on what you feel comfortable with. I do think it's good to tentatively ask people, not passively, but tentatively. You can still ask them, but you're just kind of wanting to make sure that you're understanding. So that's tone and kind of how you deliver it. Probably your pacing matters, that kind of thing. Now, when we get into empathy, when we more into reflecting back emotion or reflecting back in an empathetic way, like I was saying, the first part is like reflecting back content. When you reflect back content, you're just literally trying to understand what they're talking about, like the content of what they're trying to say. When we get into a little bit below the surface, when we're trying to understand the emotion underneath, that's when the empathy skills can really kind of start to come into play, because then we're using our ability to hear what they're saying, and then we're starting to hear some emotions or some of the feelings and help them name some of those things. And then simultaneously in our mind, we can hear that emotion and we can have a connection to that emotion because we know what maybe that emotion feels like ourselves. And that's when we can start connecting those two things together. Okay, does that make sense? I'm sure it makes logical sense. It should make
Can I
logical.
ask one more question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, you sure can.
Okay, so I was trying to think of a way to phrase without giving the information that was shared. So like, say somebody said that was shared, this is what the expectation is of me. Like, this is what someone or some people are expecting.
Mm-hmm.
But right now I don't feel like I'm able to meet that expectation.
Mm-hmm.
And so as the counselor, could you say, okay, this is what I'm hearing. This is how I see that you're feeling. But could you say, here's some things that you could try, or here are some alternate, some things that you could do instead to not make yourself feel that way? Does that make sense? Try not to give away what was shared.
Yeah, sure.
Because I know you said not to give advice, but you could say, here are some other options that you have without telling them what to do.
What's the difference between giving them advice and what you just asked? If you could
I feel like giving advice would be telling somebody, this is what I would do and this is what I think you should do. And then if I'm sometimes people don't know what their other choices are. So if you allow them to have some choices and say, here are some options, now you can make the choice. I feel like that's kind of putting the ball in their court, but kind of giving them some resources or some tools to use versus just telling them what to do.
Oh, okay. So you're hearing those as two different things.
Kind of.
Okay.
I feel like if you're not saying this is what I would do or this is what you could do, but I feel like sometimes if you don't know what to do because you've always had the same expectation, I feel like maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, sure. No, I think it's a good question. What do you guys think? That's a good question.
Well, I think that they're coming to us to try a new way of life, a new way of living. They want to make a change. So in order to make a change, they need to have options, but we need to do what we're doing tonight and get to the nitty gritty of it before that can happen.
Okay.
I think sometimes that I was just going to say, I think sometimes that in working with them, you can help them sort of figure out the options, right? Like maybe by asking open-ended questions like, I don't know, something like, I don't know, what do you think? Or some, I hear that you want to make this change. What are you thinking some options might be? It's sort of just almost, you might have, of course, some ideas in your mind, but just kind of being with them while they figure out those ideas.
Yeah. Yeah.
I remember my therapist early on told me that you're not going to be with me forever, Jared. I hope you fire me someday. If you're with me 10 years from now, maybe you're still stuck on some stuff. And so I remember coming to him, asking him, hey, what should I do here? What do I do about that? And he would turn it around on me. And I didn't like it at first, but he would say, I don't know, Jared, what do you want to do about that? What do you think you should do? And he would guide me toward like my feelings, like what feelings were going on inside that was preventing me from, going down a certain path. So he didn't give me advice, didn't tell me what I should do. He just asked me what I think I should do, what was blocking me from making that decision, what fears or anxieties I had. And I didn't like it at first, but that helped me get my own voice and get my own autonomy and not rely on him.
I think also it would be important to think about if we feel ourselves wanting to give options even or give advice, I wonder if there's something we're feeling that we don't like. Like we don't like the emotion that's being felt. For example, I'm assuming most of us would know what it feels like to not meet expectations, even if we're meeting them, but we feel like we're not meeting them. Like if we feel like we're not meeting an expectation, that's a really difficult feeling. And especially if you, in general, in your life have felt like you've met expectations, you've done pretty well, but all of a sudden you're having trouble. That's a little bit, that can be a little bit frustrating and a little anxious and fearful depending on the context. So sometimes when we find ourselves wanting to give advice or wanting to give options or wanting to tell people what to think or how to think, even if we feel like that's what they need, it might be because we ourselves are feeling a difficult emotion that we need to figure out. And we're just trying to get through it. We just want to give them, say this thing so we can move on instead of figuring out what's actually happening.
And what she shared wasn't like an expectation for somebody like I have the expectation for myself that I should, achieve this level or something like that. It wasn't that kind of expectation. I just didn't know how to word it without sharing what she shared because that's her personal.
I understand. No, I'm just saying in general. We could be talking about whatever topic. You could pick a topic. Honestly, if I'm being really honest and blunt, you guys have to figure out if you want to be telling people suggestive advice or if you want to help people learn how to figure things out. That's what you, in honesty, that's what you'll have to figure out as your own clinician. I mean, if we're being honest.
I like the way that Jared worded that, because I was kind of stuck in that same mindset as like Danielle, when it was like, well, I do see that as two different things. But when he said, you know, eventually they do want to fire us, like if we're constantly giving advice, then we're not helping them learn to think for themselves and work through things themselves.
That's what I'm saying. You guys have to decide what you want, how you want, what type of clinician you want to be. If you want to be a clinician that helps people figure things out and work through things, you'll do that a certain way. And if that's not as important to you, you won't. And I'm not trying to be mean about it. I'm just being honest. This is literally, that's how people decide what to do. Please don't hear me trying to be like mean. I'm not really. This is really just, I'm legit. Like, this is what you're going to be figuring out.
No, that makes sense. I think I'm just trying to understand like how how I forgot who asked, but like what to say in that situation. Cause like I don't want to, you know, be that person that they have to come to. Like I want to help them figure it out. I'm a teacher. That's what I do in general, trying to help my kids figure out how to learn and do things for themselves. So I'm used to that. I just think it's hard, like whenever you empathize, I guess, with somebody wanting to just sit and listen and, you know, help them figure it out. I think that's just a struggle that most people are going to have when they start out.
Well, it's 100% the struggle they're having is why they're coming to you. So it's
I meant
also,
for myself, like myself as a counselor.
I'm talking
No.
about you. I'm talking about you too. What's stopping you from figuring this out?
I think just my nature to want to help.
Right.
And I know that I'm helping by
But what's important about helping to you?
to help them utilize the tools that they need to be successful on their own.
Right. And what's important about people being successful on their own? What is important
Learning.
about that?
That they can be independent and not have to rely on somebody else.
What does that feel like when you see that happen for someone?
Proud. Like that you're happy that they can do that on their own and they can figure things out without needing somebody else.
Yeah. So what does this feel like as we talk about it right now?
I'm feeling like I think that it's important to learn for myself that how to communicate with the client without giving them my opinion or my suggestions, and being able to listen to help them, give them tools.
Yeah. So I asked 3 questions. This is where you figure out for yourselves. This is where you figure out the direction you want to go. Right. So, and literally, and Danielle, thanks for speaking up. This is what you're bringing up is really important. I think it's great what you're bringing up, and what everyone's sharing is great, because this is legit. Like this is real life. This is what happens. This is legitimately clients they want advice or suggestions or being told what to do. Sometimes they don't, but sometimes they do. What I was doing with you, Danielle, is basically asking you to try to dig in for yourself to figure out what you already know, but you hadn't brought it out yet. You already know what it is. But when you start connecting the thoughts with the feeling, that's when things start changing. Right? For example, if anybody brings any topic up and they're having struggles with it, and you can ask them, what does it feel like when that happens? Or is this the first time this has happened? Is this how you typically respond? Or when you feel that way, or when that happens to you, how do you typically respond? And if they say blah, 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 you say, is this a new thing, or is this how you've always done it? Or then all of a sudden we're connecting like all these things together. Does that make sense? And it's all a matter of trying to figure out the right questions. I think what's hard about the level at which you guys are right now is that you really do want to ask really good questions, which is really important. You might not know exactly how to ask them yet or which ones to ask yet, but you'll figure it out. That's why we're doing this, right? That's why we keep doing all the skill building, because eventually you just figure it out. Does that make sense? Maybe, hopefully.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm rambling. Hopefully I'm not. I think this slide up here that I have, the last bullet point, use metaphors to reflect feelings. Tyler has that was a great example that Tyler gave with the heavy boots. I mean, that metaphor is like, that's gold when clients give you stuff like that. Like even David talking about the therapy cat and sitting in front of, I mean, that stuff's like, you can tell me more about that. What are the first thing I thought of when Tyler said that was when you throw those boots off, like what's that feel like? Or are these like real boots? Or are they made up? What are the boots made of? Like you can ask things like that. When people cry, even, we talked about crying earlier. You can say, obviously you're very emotional. Is there, like I've said to clients, tell me what the tears are trying to say. You can say things like that depending on the client. Or what things are you feeling right now? And if they say, I don't know, it seems like you're very overwhelmed right now. Yeah, I'm very overwhelmed and I feel sad. I mean, like you can use things that they bring up, and especially metaphors like things that are descriptive and can give description to emotion, really help people to describe things. Sometimes you can do it without them really thinking about it, and it's even better. Narrative therapy is a model of therapy that it's in the postmodern theory vein. Narrative therapy is a great example of using metaphor to help people tell their story and get their story out, and help people externalize. Basically, you're helping people take what's on the inside, bring it outside. You're helping to externalize things. Going back to what Danielle was talking about earlier in terms of like even giving advice or wanting to, that makes sense why you would want to. You're trying to help people externalize what they're telling you. And sometimes they're asking questions because they can't quite figure out what's inside and they're trying to get it out. You're trying to help them get what's inside outside. Because sometimes when we get it outside, we see it, then we have a better shot at figuring it out, which is called externalizing. Now I'm really going to get off on tangents. I don't want to. Now, Cassidy, you're still here? I don't see your name. Where are you?
Cassidy.
Yeah, there you are. Sorry, you're out in the middle of the screen. You were asking about career counseling with this. Did I skip right over you, or were you talking about something else then?
I was just wanting to know, whenever you apply this to career counseling, what type of approach would you go about? Because I mean, we're helping them in that setting kind of come up with different solutions for them. So I guess I'm asking how do you set that line, I guess?
Yeah. So in career counseling, it's a little nuanced, and depending on what you think about how people decide what to do and the directions to go, you can still lay out options for people and ask them to think through those options and work through pros and cons and talk about like the things that are important to them and what makes it important. And are there things about this particular, like if you give them an assessment, let's say, are there things that really stick out to them about that? And then also, I think, especially in career counseling, it's important for them to do a little of their own homework into whatever career. Let's say that they have a list of things that maybe they potentially could do or be good at or want to do. It's important for them to do their own homework too on that. Like you can give them, information and give them resources, which in therapy, we can give our clients resources. There's nothing wrong with that. I recommend books to people all the time and talk about, my clients recommend things to me that I check out sometimes. But in career counseling, it's okay to give them resources. And I would say, let them do a little of their own legwork and then let them bounce things off of you. You can still ask them questions. And I feel like asking questions about like what makes this so important to you really helps to dig down and drill down into like what's driving them, like what's behind this kind of thing. Cassidy, does that make sense? Maybe.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah. Okay. We're gonna run out of time. Yeah, we'll pick up there next time. Yeah. All right, let's stop there. Okay. I'm gonna stop there tonight. Please don't hesitate if you have other questions. Sometimes when we do classes like this, some things make sense and then later we think of things later and we want to bring them up. I'm kind of thinking about putting a forum up on Moodle for like like processing discussions after classes. It's not it wouldn't be a requirement. You wouldn't have to do it, but I know sometimes people like talking through like what they're thinking and processing. That helps some people. So I think I'm gonna put a forum up, and I might even ask a question on there. And again, it's not a requirement. You can get on there if you want. You don't have to. There's no expectation of you guys doing any work necessarily, even over the break or anything. I am going to be working on putting you guys in, like putting you guys into groups or pairs for the assignment. I'm just waiting on. I don't have the official role yet. That's kind of what I'm waiting on, because sometimes people enter late and some people leave late, and it makes it kind of messy when I get the groups together. So I'm going to try to get that done. I probably won't get to it till after the break. I am trying to revamp the midterm because the question bank that I'm using is a good question bank, but they skipped over a chapter, and so I'm going to go back and do questions from chapter 7 and put those in there for you guys, and then I'll put the midterm back up. If you've got the midterm now and you're working through it, like the first 5 chapters are actually fine. I did add, there was question 5 on chapter 1 didn't have answers. I've actually put the answers on there now. I'm not sure how that happened either. I'm looking through my list here of things. So I'll get that stuff taken care of by this weekend for sure. I'm going to put the forum up so you guys can jump in there and talk with each other. That's great. If you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to ask for sure in email. Over the break, I will be checking email. I probably won't be checking it as like daily like I have been doing, but I will be checking things. Think of anything else? Any other questions before we exit? Okay, good. Okay. Now we can go do something else. Like, go to bed, or I don't know.
I was gonna say, go to sleep.
Go to sleep or go eat something. Or go to Dairy Queen, or I don't know. Whatever.
Oh my God.
Hey, everybody have a happy holidays, and I'll see you next year.
Thank you.
Merry
You too.
Christmas.
Thank you. Bye.
See you, Dr.
Thank
Lewis.
you.